So hey anime fans. The Saris name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Black Widow. So let's start the series. She has black eyes. Tony is unaware of this until S.H.I.E.L.D. is cleaning up after the Vanko incident has long since ended. However, her eyes have turned black. The hell? Natalie Rushman gives him a quirk and an all-too-perfect eyebrow as she looks away from the compact she's using to inspect a little cut close to her hairline. Excuse me? Your eyes. Weren't they green? Her expression unpleasant in some way. Contacts. Tony is aware of the telltale symptoms of someone attempting to silence him, yet this woman sneaked into his life and, ironically, rescued it as well. The decision of what to do is made in a just second. Yeah? Why's that? She returns her attention to her compact and says, Reasons. I gotta say, you look great either way. She rolls the same eyes they are referring to and says, Thanks. The black don't really look your color, but that might just be because I'm used to the green. He continues to press. Instead of saying anything logical, she responds, Yeah, well, they were my husband's. Due to his disapproval of the implications of his initial perception of the line, Tony takes a time to parse that. Sadly, he is unable to come up with anything that isn't similarly frightening. Your eyes were your husband's? Yes, Stark. Desperate to find out why he is, for once, mistaken, Tony says. Like you took them out of his head and stuck them in your own? She pulls out a little packet and opens it to reveal a brand new set of green contacts. That's a really ugly way of putting it, but essentially, yes. He was dying, and I wasn't, and he asked that I take them. Tony asks. That's, normal for you? Because, while it's strange, seeing eyeballs as a dying gift isn't as terrible as what he was picturing. She pauses, her well-groomed fingertips tapping a knee covered in leather. Not for me, but it wasn't entirely unheard of in his family. Eyes carried power for them. She rises and gives him a nod before turning and making her way to the restroom with her contacts in hand. Try not to ask too many questions, Stark. Some of them will only lead to trouble. With a charming smile, he asks, One more? And is certain that she is aware that he will ask regardless of her response. Does that mean they were green before? In fact, that makes her giggle. The exact opposite. For reasons I also don't feel like getting into, my eyes were red. Green is just what people question the least. On a Quinjet in Germany, when Loki is an issue, he runs across her once more. Her face is empty and serene, but her hands are white-knuckled on the jet's wheel. The whole jet trembles as something descends on it, and Loki responds to Cap's small jab by saying, Not overly fond of what follows. That something fucks off after grabbing Loki and opening the jet's doors from the outside. Tony doesn't miss the look on Nat Widow's face, but he makes sure to get his obligatory one-liner in before he fucks off too. As he follows the unknown and Loki to the ground, he turns on the communications for the brief time he is in the air. You know these guys, Natasha? Don't call me that, and not really. But I've met so-called gods before. It's never fun. As Tony plunges off a precipice and into the unknown, the conversation comes to an end. Something tells him that he just missed a really good line. Once they're all on the helicarrier and quite clean and fresh, Tony remarks. Love the new look, Natasha. Especially the eyes. He also compliments Banner on his ability to transform into a gigantic green anger monster, which is both incredibly fantastic and somewhat terrifying. Bruce is likely saddened by the scary section, so Tony will concentrate on the great part. Rather than taking the bait, she drawls, Thanks, they were a gift. Is that some reference, or? Cap asks, glancing around as if he needs assistance. Pulling herself up to lean forward on the table, she says, "More of an inside joke." Her shoulders slump as she puts all of her weight on her elbows. "Stark, I believe you were about to get on Dr. Banner's nerves with science." Tony scoffs, disregarding the astonished sounds made by those around him. "I don't get on people's nerves," he says. "But we already covered the basics. Let's start with that stick of his. It may be magical, but it works an awful lot like a Hydra weapon," Cap responds. "I don't know about that, but it is powered by the cube. And I'd like to know how Loki used it to turn two of the sharpest men I know into his personal flying monkeys." "Monkeys? I do not understand." "I do. I understood that reference. Because that type of excitement is, because that kind of stupidity is, because it's Cap." Tony rolls his eyes. "All right." He rolls his eyes because it's Cap, and the not-so-tiny part of Tony that still harbors resentment at Howard wants to find more reasons to be angry with him every time he does something. When the widow declares, "It's not magic," they choose a different course. Close, but no cigar. That's tech. Pretty tech with shiny lights and distracting effects, but still tech. When Tony says, "You've seen something like this before?" it can only be a good thing if his eyes are fixed on hers and he's looking for the trace of black behind the green lenses. She taps her fingers against her upper arm, saying, "This in particular, no. Similar stuff, though. Not similar enough, in terms of energy type, for me to track the Tesseract, though, which is annoying. The mind control, though, is relatively familiar. Scorpion seals, we called them. They work differently, though, and they weren't this fast or elegant." Fury screams, "Do you think your old teacher would know?" Tony is really unaware of what is happening. "No, probably not. Have a guess or be interested enough to get involved, potentially." She puckers up. "He's hard to predict, but he's smart enough that having him on our side would be preferable to not. A man like that She corrects him. "Person." Fury begins anew. "A person like that isn't one I want on my ship. I've got enough trouble with just Stark." "Hey," Tony says, covering his heart with his palm. "You don't want me here?" Fury mouths a harsh line and says, "You don't follow orders. Don't need more of that on board than I already have." And Tony is hardly courteous enough to seem as though he doesn't notice if his good eye slides across Thor and Steve while he's saying it. When Loki and Bruce leave for the lab, Tony can't help but watch his prison. Despite being only a camera and audio feed, it begins recording as soon as the widow enters. "There's not many people who can sneak up on me. But you figured I'd come." Loki's smile, which is as sardonic as Tony anticipates, says, "I hoped. It is, after all, a great honor to encounter the Lady of the Whirlpools." From here, Tony is unable to see the widow's face. He wishes he could. Bruce swarms up to him, and they look at each other. "Haven't heard that name in a while. Barton told me quite a lot. I asked him about you, to tell me everything, to go backwards, from now to the beginning. It took me longer than it should have, perhaps, to realize that he was speaking of far too many events for a human lifespan." She responds, "That's just how it goes sometimes." Loki creeps toward the window and says, "I suppose it is. Tell me, why do you join these humans? You could rule this planet if you so chose." "By your side?" she asks dismissively. "Hardly. I remember your kind. You and your teacher may be the sole survivors, but you were great, once." She shifts her weight, but Tony is still unable to see her face in any of the cameras. "I'm not interested in ruling from the top. It's a boring place to be. Been there, done that. Left for a reason." I thought that reason was the fires. Who did you think set them? You're bluffing. Perhaps. But I survived the resurrection of Atsuki God and the momentary existence of the Shinju, a manifestation of the very Yggdrasil your people claim keeps the worlds intact. I survived the very destruction of the hidden continent. What makes you think I won't survive you? She moves closer to the window. I'm sure whoever sent you is. Loki slams his hand against the glass and roars. I sent myself. She doesn't recoil. That's so? She asks as she begins to move sideways and circle the cage, her fingers tapping against the railing. You know, that's what Ghost Uchiha thought, too. A pathetic man long dead. His power lives on. His family line, you know that power. You've seen it. And yet you abandoned them. Despite the poor quality of the camera, Loki's smile conveys grief. A mother disgusted enough by her own children to leave forever. Don't project, it's unbecoming. My children were long grown when I left. Long dead when I cut most ties, and even so, the descendants. She nods her head. Sole survivors is a bit of a poetic way to put it. Of the hidden continent, perhaps. Of the clans and powers, well, you'll find resistance in all kinds of places if you go hunting for it. Is that a hint? The tapping ceases. A warning. I have an army, one that I doubt even one of your powers would be able to stop. Would you like me to call you a monster? If you've listened to Barton, then you know I've seen worse than the ice under your skin. You know. You're unbearably naive if you think I can't tell. She chuckles. And again, that won't be the thing that makes you a monster, if you're as dead set on becoming one as you think you are. Who would choose to? It sounds like a rhetorical question, but before he can finish, she interrupts him with a real response. She tilts her head and says, You never met Kabuto. All this focus on monsters, are you bringing an army of them to our doorstep then? Why would I? Smiles Loki. You brought your own. So you mean to unleash the Hulk? Loki takes a half-minute to respond, which is simply too long to be accurate. Yes. The widow produces a reflective sound after a brief period of fragile silence. Well, would you look at that? You're lying. At least mostly. That's interesting. I am in. I'll be seeing you. Tony is unsure of his thoughts regarding any of this. When she interrupts their conversation with fury, it is Bruce who confronts her. Did you know about this? Rather than answering the question, she says, You want to think about removing yourself from this environment, Doctor? He responds, I was in Calcutta. I was pretty well removed. Loki's manipulating you. And you've been doing what exactly? Her statement, I'm asking for your sake, Doctor, not ours, is rather unexpected until Tony recalls the entire exchange with Loki. Tony really steps in between them and says, Yeah, I'm gonna have to step in here. What the hell was that whole thing with green and gold down there? He knows some things I normally try to pretend never happened. She laughs. Fury knows what's going on, and that's all you need to know. Bruce returns the discussion to the Hydra weaponry after saying, Right, because I'm about to trust him with anything. Tony is able to stay out of there long enough for Steve, Bruce, Thor, and Fury to speak, but he must then return because nuclear deterrent. 'Cause that always calms everything right down. This does result in a disagreement that involves all 6 of them. It proceeds about as Tony anticipates, with the exception that after just 1 or 2 sentences, the widow begins to rub her temples rather than speak. Even though they're yelling at each other and ignoring his distraction, Tony gets drawn back into the debate without pointing it out, and even Steve fails to notice. This is a team indeed, Bruce murmurs. Agent Romanoff, would you escort Dr. Banner back to his? Bruce points to the displays showing still visible video of the Hulk cell that Loki is trapped in and says, Where? You rented my room. Fury begins. The cell was just in case. Bruce finally yells, In case you needed to kill me, but you can't. I know. I tried. Then. A pause occurs, and Tony sees the widow's hand drop from her face. I got low. I didn't see an end, so I put a bullet in my mouth and the other guy spit it out. So I moved on. I focused on helping other people. I was good, until you dragged me back into this freak show and put everyone here at risk. He's looking at the widow, but she doesn't appear to be as upset as Bruce was likely hoping, so he says, Nobody's at risk, Dr. Banner. You want to know my secret, Agent Romanoff? You want to know how I stay calm? She drawls, I don't particularly care, no. Steve says, nearly simultaneously, Dr. Banner, put down the scepter. When Bruce looks down, he sees that he is indeed holding the scepter. The room beeps as the widow moves forward to seize the scepter from Bruce's grasp. As Bruce starts to say anything, she interrupts him and says, Dr. Banner, I know you don't trust me. But you don't need to trust me to understand that out of everyone on the planet, I am one of the very, very few people capable of taking the Hulk. On the helicarrier, you also have Thor, I suppose, but I doubt he's much good at restraining his enemies instead of simply beating them until they stop moving. After a minute, Bruce asks, This about that thing you and Loki were talking about? 'Cause I gotta say, that's not inspiring a lot of confidence in me. I've wrangled bigger, more dangerous things than a green giant with super strength and invulnerability. She gives a little grin. For instance, you don't spam natural energy beams. Bruce blinked. Like lasers? Bit wider than that. You're not that different from an old friend, even in the sense that your berserker state is the result of an unfortunate medical condition, and I handled him well enough by the time I was 18. She raises her head. The Hulk is stronger than Jugo was, of course, but the Jinchuriki? The Bijou? You've got nothing on them. Thor lets out a startled sound. You are the Lady of the Whirlpools. Okay, Tony cuts in. Loki called her the same thing. What does it mean? The widow raises an eyebrow at him, and Fury responds. None of your damn business, Stark. You want to ask after this mess is over, feel free. Right now, you have a tesseract to find. Bruce asserts. It's already been found, that was the beeping noise. Tony approaches Bruce and says, I can get there fastest. Starting with, Look, all of us, Steve begins. Thor interrupts, saying, The tesseract belongs on Asgard. No human is a match for it. The widow snorts. You want to bet? Thor seems disturbed as he opens his mouth to respond, then shuts it. You are not known for your good intentions, lady. The widow's eyebrows go up. Still human. Still a match for that thing if I'm careful. Hell, I'm thinking we just feed it to Sensei's giant Hashirama tree and call it a day. Thor's mouth dropped open. Those only exist in legends after the destruction of. It's cute how you think you actually have a better idea of what's going on in the remnants of the hidden continent than I do. Thor appears to be preparing for a fight of his own, but Bruce interrupts him as he notices something on the screen that Tony hasn't yet had a chance to see, exclaiming, Oh my God! Then everything explodes. Tony asks, So, where's Banner? After noticing Widow discussing something with Fury. I already heard that Thor got dumped from the carrier by his brother, and I know Capsicle's fine. Widow turns back to Fury and says, Banner's recuperating. When Tony notices the enormous hole ripped in the back of her garment, his eyes enlarge. Should I ask about Great Big Rip-In? Fury adds, It's nothing to worry about. Widow replies, I'd rather you didn't. After a brief exchange of glances, they shrug and return their attention to Tony. We're talking about casualties. Tony feels a knot in his stomach. He is aware that he should have done more, but he also knows that he saved many lives with the Turbine Act, almost killing himself in the process. At least they should have anticipated it. Yeah? The widow tells him. Coulson's dead. Tony doesn't believe he appreciates the stoniness in her countenance, but it's better than her crying or anything, isn't it? The Black Widow is who she is. She doesn't ever cry. After a time, he answers, Yeah, I heard. I was on the comms. Fury says, We're having a meeting on the bridge, while being stern. You're joining us. The widow places a hand on Tony's elbow and guides him toward the bridge as he passes him by. Come on, Stark. I thought he was your friend. How come you aren't more upset about this? He inquires. Do you believe what you've heard about how old I am? She asks, failing to provide a meaningful response. I'm thinking it makes more sense than anything else, considering that we had two different aliens identify you that way. Tony responds in a moment. In which case, I gotta say, you look great for your age. She snorts and says, Thanks. But what I'm getting at is this. Do you really think Phil is the first death of a friend that I've had? Tony runs a hand down his face and says, I thought you were going to say something like that. Ugh, this sucks. As they approach the bridge, she takes a step forward and bows mockingly and flowerily toward the entrance, saying, So does life. Time to get over it. He almost smiles at it. Fury throws a deck of cards onto the table directly in front of Cap, who picks them up and looks at them. These were in Phil Coulson's jacket. Guess he never did get you to sign them. They are splattered with blood, fresh enough to leave traces on the tabletop, and noticeable enough even from Tony's vantage point. We're dead in the air up here. Our communications, location of the cube, Thor. I got nothing for you. Lost my one good eye. Maybe I had that coming. Fury stops for a while. He pauses, looks at them all, and then focuses on Tony. Yes, we were going to build an arsenal with the Tesseract. I never put all my chips on that number though, because I was playing something even riskier. There was an idea, Stark knows this, called the Avengers Initiative. Oh. This is nonsense. They had informed him he wasn't cut out for the craps since he wasn't good with people. The idea was to bring together a group of remarkable people, see if they could become something more. See if they could work together when we needed them to fight the battles that we never could. Phil Coulson died still believing in that idea, in heroes. Tony nearly stands up and leaves. Something holds him there even if he is on the verge of leaving. He feels something is awry since he can still picture the widow's face and how tight it was. Fury responds, Well, it's an old-fashioned notion, and walks away. Tony thinks that should have been followed by a sigh. Then, taking out a tablet, he goes to Loki's now empty cell and flips through to the footage of Coulson's death. When he watches Loki trick his brother into the jail, he makes a tiny sound that sounds nearly like laughter. He's great at the whole trickster thing. Tony turns to see the widow sitting on the railing surrounding the now empty cage, arms straight and shoulders bent, clutching the railing as if it may collapse if she squeezes it hard enough. An hour or two ago, Thor was engulfed by the floor that opened up, and her eyes gazed blindly into it. Tony continues to observe, saying, Well, he is the god of it. You know, supposedly. He sure does love to talk. Lies are his other specialty. You know, supposedly. Tony raises his head and raises an eyebrow while pressing the pause button. Should I keep watching? You already got spoiled for the ending, Stark. All that's left is to enjoy the quips and be bitter that you couldn't change anything. You know, I never noticed how cynical you are. I mean, I noticed, but it never really hit me. And now, here it has, like Vanko punching me in the face. She informs him glibly. It's a side effect of outliving your entire continent. Makes it hard to believe in the lasting power of anything. Tony looks down at the video, presses play once more, and watches the remainder. That's fair. He pauses and taps just before Fury appears. So that's it, huh? Agent's dead. Pepper will be disappointed. She liked Phil. They were decent friends. Liked to talk about classical music and whatnot. I think he went to her for advice on Audrey a few times. That's the cello player he liked? Yeah. Was Agent actually carrying those cards, or? You think Fury would desecrate a dead man's belongings for the sake of a sick joke? It's Fury, and I think he would if he thought it would make us work together and give us a fighting chance against Mr. Shakespearean drama down there. She chuckles. God, I hate you sometimes. Yeah? A smile appears on her face as she shakes her head. How did you keep Banner on board? She chuckles and says, You wouldn't believe me if I told you. Chains, though. The proper technique name translates to something along the lines of adamantine sealing chains. So, if you don't mind me asking, and even if you do, is Natasha even your real name? She cocks her head in contemplation. Depends on what you mean by real. It's my current legal name, certainly. It's a name that I respond to as I would my own. It's a name that's defined the past few decades of my life. But you were someone else before. She gives a shrug. Names change sometimes. I am not who I once was. So, who were you before? She pulls a face. Americans never say it right. At least I can ignore that with Natasha. Can't with my original name. So do you want me to keep calling you Natasha? Her expression is hesitant. You remind me of someone. It's strange, and it makes me uncomfortable, and it makes me not want you to call me that. Tony waits. She frowns down at the metal floor and finally murmurs. Just call me Widow, I guess. She flips back and lands lightly on her feet after shaking her head. I'm going to go keep an eye on Clint. He should be waking up soon. That's gonna be a hell of a concussion. The widow grins. It should be. Before Tony can inquire what that should entail, she leaves. As he looks out over the vacant area where the cage once stood, he assumes the widow was correct when she said that the only thing left to do is to harbor resentment for things you were unable to alter. That mantra of, I should have done something, and he should have waited, makes him shudder. Steve arrives. Tony is flung from a window. That is something that occurs. He's thinking about a couple of master assassins in the back of his mind, and he's sad that he wasn't able to work in the entire Lady of the Whirlpools thing in time. Something flies out of the doorway, and he hears it in his ear. Oh hell. Something significant. It's a little frightening. Since he is also afraid, he taunts. What's that, widow? Scared? Very frightened. The army that is attacking Manhattan is more technologically advanced than he is. They aren't, that's not. She interrupts with a snarl that is inarticulate. We've got backup, I guess? Tony becomes happier at the same time that a pit of anxiety settles into his gut. Why do you say that like it's a bad thing? She murmurs. Who the fuck invited Shikaku? In a voice so low that she's most likely talking to herself. They're not exactly human, but they can help, if we keep them on task. Steve says. Romanov, who exactly are they? A gigantic flame fox leaps into the air, slams its jaws shut around one of the space whales, and barrels around a structure. Tony yells. What the fuck is that? Seriously, what the fuck? What? When did we get giant flaming foxes on our side? Are there more? The widow sighs. Not foxes, necessarily. Get down here, Stark. You're going to need a rundown of. The fox lets off a huge fucking laser as she interrupts. Tony has run out of fucks to give. What the shit? What the shit? The widow commands. It's a bijudama, I know it's weird, get down here. This time, Tony follows instructions. On the way there, he might pick up a space whale on his tail. Whoops. What? He asks. Explanation? Please? They're the tailed beasts. They're on our side. Tony waits for her to go into further detail. No, she doesn't. Banner begins to speak, but Tony interrupts him because he has important things to say. I'm bringing the party to you. As he comes around the bend, Widow literally stutters. I don't see how that's a party. When Tony sees them, his heart sinks. When he couldn't take it, he believed one of them might, so he aimed the whale at them. However, he anticipated that this area of the city will be evacuated. It's not. Civilians are still present beneath the bridge. Tony is unable to come up with a method of destroying this that won't cause the body to cause a significant number of casualties. Widow says, Get behind me. Banner asks, Are you sure? Without seeming very worried. I could. Not without that thing dropping down on traffic, you can't. Get behind me. As Tony flies in, he notices that her eyes have changed in color and pattern, with purple rings encircling the entire other iris and red filling in the other. She extends a hand to the whale, and as Tony flies by, she speaks in a voice far deeper than her own, saying something he can hear in his ears even over the wind. Shinra Tensei! The space whale appears to falter in midair before being propelled backward by an invisible force. Of course, right into the maw of a huge, overly tail-wieldy monkey. Why not? Tony gets back up and surveys the area. When he lands, Banner hasn't changed, and Barton appears amazingly upbeat for a man who should be recuperating from a head injury for at least a few weeks. I sincerely do hope you weren't expecting to do that for the whole fight. 15 seconds ago, Tony turns to face a completely clean person who was definitely not sitting on the railing with a cup of tea. Widow is pinching the bridge of her nose when he turns back to face her. Sensei, she says. What are you doing here? Karen, dear, you can't tell me there's an army of aliens coming to take over and not expect me to send help. The individual grumbles. After all, last time almost ended with the entire planet cocooned in an eternal illusion and transformed into Atsuki God's army. Thor hits the ground close by with a heavy landing. What is? Tailed beasts, interrupts the widow. I won't expect you to remember their names or titles, so just refer to them by tail numbers or apparent species for now. Sensei, I can tell Isabu and Gyuki are out in the water. Are they staying there? Along with Saiken, yes. Matatabi and Kokuo would like to help out with evacuation, Kurama, Son Goku, and Chome would all like to be involved in actual battle, and Shikaku. According to the widow, you invited Shikaku. Who the fuck invites Shikaku? He's not as bad as he used to be. The widow hisses. He's tearing down the old library for sand. The guy sort of insists. He's still not as bad as he used to be. They don't seem overly concerned with the facts. Rather, they say it as if they're highlighting something. Tony interrupts. Hi, hello, do we get to have any input on what's going on here? I'd really like to know what's going on. Giant animals made of natural energy decided that this is their fight as well. Widow sums up. They're here to help, and you should be able to tell them apart from the aliens because most of them actually resemble Earth creatures, are very colorful or pale, are very large, and may or may not be on fire, depending. Tony points to the excessively pale individual with long black hair and no discernible gender, who is still drinking tea on the low wall of the stone bridge. And, he asks, tea. She dismisses that as if it were a question she always expects to be asked, even during an alien battle. My teacher, legendary Sanin. He's older than I am. Don't bother asking about gender. He's maybe helping? He taps the hilt of a sword and says, Not my kind of fight, unfortunately, but I should be able to help cull some of them. I brought Kusanagi. The sound of a yowling cat can be heard out in the distance, but it's far louder than any cat should be, as if someone had taken a regular cat and made it the size of an airplane. Steve asks, That's one of ours then? Yes. Widow responds quickly. According to legendary Sanin, you're going to let me look at your eyes when this is over. Now, were you planning on using Susanoo? For the whole fight? Fuck no, not if the Bijou are here. There are more effective ways to deal with the small fry. She nods her head. And Amaterasu is just a bad idea all around. I was planning to just put a funnel of sorts over the city with my chains and bottleneck them in to keep them from getting far enough to be a problem, but as spread out as they are at the moment. Legendary Sanin touches his chin and says, A cage would be more effective at this point, yes. Chibaku Tensei? She pulls a face and says, Last resort, definitely. I'm probably going to end up relying on Azura Path for weaponry and maybe Animal Path. Outer Path? Not unless we see whoever's running Loki's show. When Hawkeye says, Can we go now? Like, you two can keep talking and all, but there's a city to defend. I would like to go about defending it. Legendary Sanin and the Widow exchange a look of surprise and humiliation. Widow gives a headshake. Right. Anyone need a ride? In the end, Steve is the only one who wants a ride but is unable to get one on his own since Hawkeye gets one with Tony. Obviously, that's just something that's going to stick in Tony's life these days, so the Widow goes with him, and they fly on the back of a huge beetle with 6 wings. A Hulk also appears. At least the Hulk is vaguely humanoid and not, say, a dolphin horse thing, so no one is too worried when a huge green monster attacks aliens in the middle of New York. I'd have commandeered one of those alien hover things, she says, but Chome is much more agreeable. Because he is currently feeding himself to a massive space whale in order to blow it up from the inside, Tony doesn't remark on it. He gets a glimpse of what must be Shikaku, stomping around and attacking objects, possibly causing more property damage than the aliens themselves, while laughing uncontrollably, using sand as a weapon, and possibly trying to dance. He's at least attempting to assist. Tony is a little concerned about the possible repercussions if he were to oppose the city, or simply massacre everything without distinction. After 30 seconds, Tony is unable to put it into words. A glistening grid of gold bars, he zooms in, and those are undoubtedly spike chain bars, declines across the city, its hazy golden force field filling in between the bars, trapping everything and everyone inside, including the portal itself. Tony tumbles around a bunch of aliens and throws a tiny grenade at them, saying, Please tell me the civilians can get out. As the explosion detonates, Widow reassures him. Unless one of them is hiding something terrible, I'll be able to let them slip out. My sensing is good enough to tell which life source is human and which one isn't. Give me a sec, and I can isolate the portal to keep more from getting in at all. A deep voice that is just vaguely recognizable says, "The funny part." And Tony questions when legendary Sanin received a communication link. Is that she's never been a frontline fighter. Fuck you, sensei. Language, my dear. Steve says, we have a war to win, so keep the chatter off the communications. The legendary Sanin chuckles. This isn't a war, child. It's clean up. Just as a huge golden chain suddenly flies in and tangles around a space whale, Tony dodges it. The space whale is gradually crushed while he watches. Remind me never to piss you off, Widow says with a hint of humor. These chains were designed to hold down demons. The very ones helping us fight right now, in fact. These aliens? The Hulk? They're nothing compared to a raging bijou. Legendary Sanin says, I'll be the one telling them you said that. She pauses for a second, and Tony flies high enough to briefly see her over the buildings and zoom in. Cute! He suspects it's not one of her widow's bites, but there's a mechanical thing growing out of her arm. So I'm on top of Stark Tower, Tony says. I notice, when no one else speaks. There's a force field around the Tesseract, and I don't know about any of you, but I'm not eager to accidentally blow up New York City by fiddling with it without knowing what might happen. Legendary Sanin advises. Red-eye power in a grenade past the force field and take it out like that. The Widow sounds quite weary of everyone's shit. As mentioned, I don't know what might happen if I do that. I still don't know what kind of power this thing works on. What if using a teleportation technique nearby sets something off and makes the portal bigger? The legendary Sanin interrupts himself, saying, Then we Bijudama them until, do you think we could just position Chomei in front of the portal and Bijudama everything on the other side? Get her on that, says the Widow. Stark suggestions? This is your kind of tech. I didn't design it, he adds instantly. And without direct access or visuals, or even pre-existing blueprints, I'm not going to be able to help. Is Selvig there? Recovering from a nasty blow to the head, but yes. Ask him. Just as they're finishing up, someone chooses to launch a nuke, which nearly kills Tony. As a matter of fact, he has no idea why. A nuke would have caused greater damage, even though there was a lot of property damage. Perhaps they were concerned about the enormous creatures. Perhaps the Avengers themselves frightened them. Tony is unsure. However, before anybody can stop him, he launches a nuke through a wormhole and barely escapes in time to avoid becoming trapped in space on the opposite side of the universe next to a detonating nuke. He wakes up to a number of stuff, including Steve declaring they won and the Hulk shouting at him. He also craves shawarma. Widow punches him in the arm after waiting for him to remove the outfit. Ow! She snarls. Don't do that again, you didn't need to make the sacrifice play on that one. With as much sarcasm as he can manage, he says, What was your solution, then? She wrinkles her lip and says, Chibaku Tensei, which is basically a low-power black hole. Send that through the portal and wait for gravity to do its work and drag the nuke in. It's an excellent concept, but wouldn't work. The nuke's existing propulsion and momentum wouldn't let it be pulled in as neatly as you were hoping, and you were busy getting it to close. After a moment of hesitation, he exclaims in complete shock. Did you just stick your tongue out at me? She turns away with her nose up in the air and crosses her arms. Tony then recognized where all those chains must have come from when he noticed a huge hole in the back of her uniform. He makes a headlines gesture with his hands, saying, "Alert the presses, the Black Widow actually has a sense of humor. I can see the front page now. I've already shown you my sense of humor, Stark. Most of your humor revolves around off-color jokes about your dead husband's eyes," Tony says to her. "At least around me." For whatever reason, after rolling the previously described eyes, legendary Sanin hustles her away. Tony believes that this is about the eyes, just like anything else. "What the hell are you doing in my tower?" Glancing up from her lunch, the widow glances. "Yo." Pepper hides her discomfort with a bright smile as she leans over Tony. "Natalie! It's been a while." "Yep." Tony demands to know. "Who let you in?" "I let myself in." "How?" Looking up at him, she says, "I've been a ninja since the age of 12. That's a long lifetime of getting into places I shouldn't even know about." Tony looks up and then says, "Jarvis, keep an eye on all her movements. I want to know if this happens again. I want to know how. We need to, patch holes in all the security or whatever." Her eyebrows raise. "I have literal centuries of experience, Stark." Pepper asks, "Excuse me? Centuries?" After giving Pepper a quick blink, the widow looks to Tony. "You didn't tell Pepper?" "I mean, it's not much of a secret anymore, but it isn't mine to tell, is it?" Tony smiles. "Also, I promised myself I wouldn't piss you off. Why would I do something that might piss you off? You're terrifying. And a red-headed woman. I have enough terrifying redheads in my life. I don't need to go around making the situation worse for myself by actively making them mad at me." "Tony," Pepper chastises him in a low voice. "Anyway," says the widow, "I'm crashing here for a bit." Tony considers that and blinks. "So, assuming we have room for you, which, given the reconstruction, I'm not saying we do." "We have the room," Pepper says. "Why do you want to crash here? Doesn't the shadowy government agency or your teacher have a place for you?" She briefly taps her fingers against the table and says, "Shield's not exactly safe for me at the moment, and my teacher is unavailable." When she says, "That is frustratingly vague," Tony remarks. "But I'll take it. Jarvis can show you to your floor. I'm having donuts brought in, if you want some." "Strawberry glaze?" "Sure." "I'm staying exactly where I am until the donuts show up." "Of course. Who wouldn't wait for donuts?" "Stark." Someone yells his name, and Tony pulls away at his table. Once more, he slept off while working. Bruce, why hadn't he? Tony had no idea what Brucey was doing at some college. Perhaps giving a lecture? Or maybe Tony had a memory of an ex-girlfriend. Perhaps he is pretending to be giving a lecture while he is visiting the girlfriend? "Ross, Betty. It's called that. General Ross is her father. That man is someone Tony knows." What a jerk. A hand waves in front of his face, saying, "Stark. Stark." He pushes the hand away and turns to see the widow looking delighted. I'm up. What are you doing here?" "Pepper's on a business trip." "I'm aware. She said to keep you from working yourself to death while she's gone." The widow is beaming. "So we're going on a field trip?" Tony blinked. "What?" "Pack your bags, we're leaving in 15 minutes. I already have a Quinjet prepped, so all you need to do is get one of the suits and..." She raises her nose. "Maybe take a shower and change, yeah? And grab something to eat, I guess. In only 15 minutes? I'm sure you can manage. He does. For coffee's sake, he also gets it. Before Tony wonders where they're headed while eating falafel, they've already traveled halfway to Chicago. The answer is, what's left of the hidden continent? Tony chews for a bit, thinking about that. I thought the entire thing was underwater due to tectonic activity. There's a handful of places still above water. The peaks in the former land of iron, for one. That's not where we're headed, though. She shrugs. Never did get along with the samurai. Yeah? Too much honor. Not enough playing dirty. They didn't like me much. Sounds like the capsicle, says Tony. She laughs loudly. Steve reminds me of all the worst and best qualities of my idiot cousin. Mostly my idiot cousin. I seem to surround myself with well-meaning blondes who are great at tactics, but still mostly rely on brawn even when I'd rather they stay the hell out of my life. Tony blinked. I thought you liked Steve. She taps her fingers against the Quinjet's controls and says, Steve's great, but he's also HM. There's always a point at which your greatest strengths are going to get you in trouble somehow. Much like you, Steve's always on that edge, but his strengths are also the ones that get on my nerves, and ones that he's much less aware of how his better personality traits can turn into flaws than you are. That's definitely the first time I've heard that. The widow gives a shrug. It's true, if only because you've been through that. You're what, 50 years old? You've had your time to shine and your time to fall and your time to claw your way out of disgrace and acknowledge that you fucked up. Steve, he's still Captain America. He's still wallowing in issues of circumstance, but at one point, his flaws are going to become his own greatest enemy, and he's going to have to deal with that. Speaking from experience? I already had my character building exercises, Stark. I was done with that story by the time I was 18. She nods her head. But back to Steve, if the parts of him that remind me of my cousin play out the same way, he's going to end up letting old friends almost kill him when they go bad, rather than admit that maybe he should just let go. He's going to end up focusing on his own loyalties to the detriment of larger populations. He's going to end up following his own convictions even when it could hurt countless people instead of trying to find a compromise. He's going to end up impressing his own paradigm of the world onto everyone else's stories to insist he understands, even when he has no chance of doing so. He's going to become such a paragon of good, even in his own mind, that he's going to stop being able to see that not everyone thinks the way he does, and that even some good people need to cling to their own darkness to function. Like you? Her smile is devoid of humor. It's bloodless and tight. Like me, yes. They sit in silence for a while. That cousin, he dead? Yeah. Tony nods. Well, that was expected. Before you said something about how you didn't want me calling you Natasha because I reminded you of someone. She lets out a hiss. You sure know how to pick a delicate question, Stark. He waits. You remind me of my husband, she says after a pregnant pause. Not the snark or the womanizing or anything, but the story, I guess? I'm not following, he says. You got involved in a system you ultimately didn't approve of due to the pressures of people who were older than you that didn't necessarily have your best interests in mind. She starts. You were manipulated by someone you trusted into becoming someone you hated. You tried to leave a system that forced you to kill, but only managed to change part of it before getting back in under your own terms to try and change it some more from the inside. You fucked up bad, and then you tried to help fix it. You're a genius in some fields, but an utter idiot sometimes when it comes to the people you care about, several of whom you've almost gotten killed. With all your personal issues mostly solved, You're frequently unsure of your own worth as a person outside of your skills and wealth, and constantly strive to prove to the people you care about that you're worth keeping in their lives by showering them with gifts and developing new toys in your lab. Am I hitting the nail on the head yet? Tony sits quietly for a long time. This Quinjet is a pretty little one, but he wants to get out. In the end, he exclaims, "You're terrifying. So does that make you Pepper?" The widow shakes her head, saying, "Pepper's way too nice and civilian to have someone like me associated with her like that. God, I feel like I'm going to get blood on her outfit just by looking at her for too long." By now, they are over open water. Apparently the Pacific. "So I remind you of your husband, and Steve reminds you of your cousin. Any other comparisons?" She falters briefly as she asks. "In personality or with story or role or whatever?" He shrugs and says, "Either works." She squints at him for a while before shaking her head. "Well, for roles, I'd actually parallel my husband to Loki and my cousin to Thor, if only because of the whole Indra and Ashura business, though. Never mind, we're safe." Although he really doesn't, Tony kind of wants to know. "What about Brucey?" Trying to conceal a smile, she purses her lips and says, "Jugo. Definitely Jugo. God, those two would get along so well if they ever met. Medically induced rage monster that's actually a really nice guy that just wants to hang out in nature and chill away from people. They'd be bonding in no time." Hawkeye? I didn't know anyone back then that worked exclusively with archery. 1010 was a total weapons nut though, and we met a few times. She was an interesting woman. She's biting her lip. If we parallel my cousin and husband over to the Asgardians, I'd probably slot Kankuro or Shadow Ninja over to you. Shadow Ninja was the smartest man I ever met, but Kankuro's puppets were the closest parallel to engineering that the continent had. And Steve? She nods to herself and says, Rockley. Fury and Hill would have been Hitaki's sixth headmaster and Kata Shizen. And then there's you. She concurs. And then there's me. After some while, he asks, "So what's your story? You had all this stuff to say about me and Steve, and you brought up your husband and cousin, but what about you?" "I've got a lot of red in my ledger." "That's not an answer." She gives him a brief, sultry glance, complete with a lifted eyebrow and a quirked mouth, before turning back to the sky she is guiding them through. "Well, I was a raging bitch for a while. Not without reason, mind you, but, well, teenagers. Most of the girls in our profession had their violent streaks at that age. Hinata didn't, but I'm pretty sure she never even hurt a fly while she was off the clock unless she was training. Sakura kept hers into adulthood, but that may have been fifth headmaster's influence." The widow presses her lips together in a fine phrase. "But like any idiot, my story is basically that I fell in love with someone while they were in the middle of their story, and they nearly killed me." Tony blinked. "Like nearly got you killed, or?" She adds, "Shoot the hostage. It took me years to get over that, not counting the night I broke out of prison. I hadn't gotten much sleep that night, and I ran into a war right after, so I was kind of mood swinging all over the place." Tony thinks about that for a moment. "Please tell me you aren't talking about your husband." She smiles wanly at him. Tony runs a hand down his face and says, "What the fuck? You married the man who shot you?" To be fair, he tried to kill literally everyone he cared about at least once, unless they died before he could. She laughs. Even the daughter from his first marriage, though that was an accident. Before he can stop himself, Tony asks, "First marriage? Wait, no, going back, what do you mean everyone?" "His brother, my cousin, his old teammate / first wife, his teacher, his daughter, She smiles. I don't think he ever directly tried to kill Suigetsu and Jugo, but he did abandon them to the samurai after the Kage summit. Tony looks at her with wide eyes. Why the fuck did you marry him then? Not counting the daughter thing, almost all of this occurred during a single stretch of like 3 months, maybe? I mean, he was planning on killing his brother for a long-ass time, but most people would have agreed that was justified from his perspective since the brother had slaughtered their entire immediate and extended family when my husband, Nudu friend, was 7 and the brother was 13. Tony looks at him wide-eyed. What? Yeah, we all thought he just snapped from the stress of ninja life and gone on a rampage, and Nudu friend vowed to have revenge by killing him in return. Finding out he had done the whole thing on government orders was what led to Nudu friend snapping and trying to kill everybody else as well, for whatever reason made sense at the time of the attempted murder. She shrugs. It's ninja life. You get used to a little death here and there, and he did get better. Eventually. Tony continues to gaze. She shrugs and says, and about the first marriage? Not much to say. He married a girl he'd known longer than me, because it was what everyone expected and he mistook fondness for a friend to be love for a romantic partner. They had a child, and then realized within a year or two that it wasn't working out and got a divorce. Couple years passed, and I married him instead, and we worked out better. Until he died and gave you his eyes. You really care a lot about the eyes, Stark. Tony moves about in his chair. I mean, at least I understand why giving you his eyes was actually a tactical thing and not just a really weird ritual. Her fingers tap 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 against the wheel as she says, hey, people have traditions that are always going to be a little weird to outsiders. That doesn't make them wrong. But yeah, any other questions? I'm basically offering you my life story. Not a lot of people get that. Other than why are you telling me all this, and what's up with the whole Lady of the Whirlpools thing, I guess I'm still kind of curious as to the marriages. Like why the first one didn't work and how yours did. You're thinking about Pepper, aren't you? Tony becomes motionless. The widow lets out a loud chuckle. Oh, that's adorable. No, but the first marriage fell apart because they wanted different things in life, and because they'd repeatedly spent so much time apart that they didn't really know each other anymore. And I don't mean taking a couple weeks apart with calls or something. I mean months or years at a time with zero contact whatsoever. She very much liked being able to call someplace home. He very much enjoyed wandering about the continent without much contact. He only met his daughter a handful of times before the divorce, and Sakura, the first wife, had insisted on joining us on his travels while she was pregnant, up to and including giving birth in a cave with only me for medical support, which was very unwise. Tony gapes. Wow, that's dedication, I guess? She was incredibly dedicated to him. He was not very dedicated to her. The widow grumbles. She deserved better, honestly. He was a good fit for me, but he was all wrong for her. She needed someone willing to be by her side at home on a regular basis. Did he do that for you? I was more mobile than she was. I'd lost my ancestral home before I was born, my hometown by the age of 13, and my new home by 15. I spent the 2 years after that living nomadically as I hunted down the evil older brother I mentioned earlier, and then went back to rotating between research labs to be wherever I was needed most. I had nothing I would consider a permanent home after a while, and, well, Nerdu friend visited us at the labs more often than he visited her, even when they were still married. Not for an affair, of course. His opinion on sex was that it was solely for procreation and otherwise an incredibly boring thing that was best left to other people. Probably the biggest difference between him and me, then. The widow shrugs once more. But it was still a sign that the situation wasn't any good for poor Sakura. It all worked out in the end. After the divorce, she entered a polyamorous relationship with her best friend and another old teammate, which was definitely gossiped about, But I don't think Sakura cared, and Sai definitely didn't care, and Ino reveled in the attention. And you got the man of your dreams? Well, it took me a hell of a lot longer than it took Sakura to move on to Ino, but yeah, I did. She puckers up. We were happy while we were together. We even made the kids' thing work a little better than he had with Sakura. We were both assholes, of course, but we were happy that way. A love story for the ages. Her smile fades as she says, Hey, it worked. Don't knock it. The Lady of the Whirlpools thing is, ugh. My family name translated to Whirlpool, and so did the name of our ancestral home, since it was named after us. Due to its destruction prior to my birth, I was the only person left alive that was fully of Uzumaki blood by the time I was 16. I think that's when Nagato died. I had kids, and so did my cousin, of course, but those kids were pretty heavily tied to the other parent due to Do's spirit art inheritance, and only a handful of descendants ever really got the full Uzumaki education in Fuin spirit art. So after my husband died, I went back to the ancestral home, set up camp, and became a legend. So why are you telling me all of tea? She depresses the throttle and they begin falling into a collection of relatively small, temperate islands in the midst of the ocean. We're here, buckle up. He almost misses the Black Widow's actual response as he looks at her for a moment because that is not the nuanced avoidance he was expecting. I told you, you remind me of someone I cared about, and sometimes it's good to talk about the past. Never in his life has Tony seen so many brand new, sparkly toys to play with. The fact that each person stiffens at the sight of them, bows, and yells something that always begins with Uzumaki-sama has also never distracted him so much. The rest of the material varies depending on the individual, but it always begins with that. Ms. Big Shot, huh? Kenneth Stark. I'm making Pepper happy by giving you new toys to play with. Isn't that your dream come true? Rather than responding, he asks, Is this place yours? Legendary Sanins. We're all that's left of the originals, so. Tony nods and returns his attention to the technology she is demonstrating. Okay, is there a reading I could do to get a better idea of your meaning of core energy? It sounds a lot more quantifiable and scientific than what I usually hear, so I'm really interested now. I thought you'd never ask. So do you have any surviving descendants? Yes. Do they know about you? There's a reason that the Lady of the Whirlpools is a title that persists throughout the ages. Steve asks Tony, Did you know? When he leaves the hospital. Did you know that S.H.I.E.L.D. had a Hydra infestation? Widow told me, yeah? After he froze, Steve looked at the redhead beside him. She pats Steve's face and says, You're not very discreet, Steve. I mean, Stark's a showman and all, but he's a lot better at keeping a secret. After gaping, Steve turns to face Tony. You could have helped. And you could have helped with the Mandarin, but that was my issue, while this was yours. It was a world issue, states Steve. And the Mandarin was blowing people up countrywide, but it somehow still fell to me and Rhodey to deal with him. You had Widow and that new guy and Hill and Fury. Steve declares right away. Fury's dead. Tony blinked. Right. Like Phil's dead. Widow makes a fistful of coughing. I didn't tell him about. Oh. Steve glances at each of them. Didn't tell me what? So when a person bites me. After escorting Steve to the showers in order to give him his own floor rather than forcing him to live in cramped apartments in Washington, D.C., Tony remarks. There's something you're not telling me about this, isn't there? Something happened. Remembered when I said that one of the things I saw in Steve that reminded me of my cousin was the kind that was liable to make him let an old friend almost kill him rather than accept the fact that letting go might be healthier for him? And that I was going to stick around Steve until he grew up a bit more because I could see the incoming self-destruction of all sorts? Tony's eyes enlarge. Shit. What ha? Bucky Barnes was brainwashed and repeatedly cryo-frozen by HYDRA, and has been the Winter Soldier since the late 1940s. She explains in a hurry. Fuck. Is he okay? Tony's thoughts were reeling. He needs counseling, right? We should probably get him some food or something too. Maybe fly in that Sam Wilson guy. Widow strokes one temple and then gives him a cunning smile. I feel like it isn't over yet, but I don't know. Maybe. So. That was oddly caring and responsible of you. You aren't usually that open about it. Is this a sign that Tony Stark wants to be Team Dad? Tony turns pale. Oh God, no. Bruce is Team Dad. I can be, like, Team Beer Uncle. You try but are ultimately too scared of feelings and disappointing people and just shove money and nice presents at people until you feel like you're helping? She inquires. He gripes. Stop doing that. Sorry. Habit. So when you say you get the feeling this isn't over yet? He hasn't learned his lesson, so to speak. The world conspired to work in a way that let him keep believing he was in the right no matter what. She is biting her lip. It's like, remember what we were told about Thor? Like how his whole thing with Earth started. I can't remember how many drinks you'd had by that point. I remember it. Right, so I keep thinking about how it's like that. Thor learned his lesson that even monsters are people or whatever, but ever since then, the enemies he keeps getting are ones that he can fight if he just smashes them hard enough with his hammer. No diplomacy, of course, and no trickery unless he gets his brother to do it. She breathes deeply. And that's kind of what I think might be happening with Steve right now. Universe keeps telling him he's right, so he keeps being more and more sure of himself, until he isn't just not questioning his good decision, but not pausing to question the bad ones either. She reaches up and kneads her eyes, saying, basically, ugh, I hate hunches sometimes, especially ones that come super early. There's more? Tony asks, his voice bursting with incredulity. She says, just be careful. I don't know. Your story, I guess? It's not over. Or maybe it's backtracking. Or overcorrecting? Or, I don't know. Maybe story isn't the right metaphor, but it's just hunches. Tony swallows. Right. No pressure or anything. Tony is able to acknowledge that Ultron is mostly his fault. He's not a fool. Bruce was also involved, but Tony was the one who suggested that they should just let the Mind Stone continue to run simulations while they partied because he didn't think it was worth unplugging it from the scanners. After all, they had essentially given up anyhow, so what could go wrong? Apparently a lot. Before Widow's chains grabbed it and tore it to pieces, a bot had nearly escaped out the window. Jarvis had also passed away. Ultron was also missing someplace. During the heated conversation, Widow adds, "We still have the Mind Stone." Steve asks, "And that helps, how?" Tony believes that he has been cold toward her for months. Perhaps he is resentful of the betrayal? Since the Widow always calls Tony out on his shit, Tony secretly believes that they are only one dispute away from Steve questioning why she always sides with Tony, which is nonsense. But well, Tony is a little more prepared to wait it out until the Widow shows up and explains to him exactly how he messed up again and why Pepper is upset this time, whereas Steve always believes he will win, so he makes things public. She takes up the spear and spins it around in her palms. It's been a few years since the Tesseract. I can track the kinds of energy these things use now. How did you think we found it the first time? She asks. Ultron is technically just code, but if he coalesces, I suppose, then I can find him, along with anyone or anything else that's been augmented by this thing. Like the twins in Sokovia, Tony continues. She acknowledges him by pointing at him and saying, Bingo. They sort of piece together a plan. Hawkeye's married. Okay. That's a thing. Tony's mind is acting a little erratic. It's sadder than soda. From the table, Widow asks, You didn't know? I thought you'd have hacked some files or satellites by this point. I try not to pry too much into your lives. There is some need for privacy. That expression has been on Widow's face for several hours. The appearance that says, I want to call someone out on their shit, but it'll only make things worse. She tells him after he waits until he can speak with her alone, possibly with only Hawkeye listening. I kind of want to shake those twins by the shoulders and tell them to get over themselves. Maybe stick them in a hell-viewing illusion based off of my own memories. They don't seem like bad kids. They're 25. Shit, really? Asks Tony after giving it some thought. Are you sure? Yep. I checked the file. They look so young, though. She says, Maybe you're just getting old. That's really you hypocrite. She gives him a smile. I almost forgot that you're almost as old as Thor. Older. Why, wait, you said a couple centuries. 15 is technically a couple. You liar. Her smile gets bigger. I'm going to go check on Laura's pregnancy. I think she wanted to ask you to check out the tractor out in the barn. Tony is very certain that the widows were able to adopt the twins by the end of that expedition. Just a bit, you understand. They need somebody looking out for them. At least I speak their language. Sokovian is legally its own language, but it's technically just a dialect of Serbo-Croatian, which I'm fluent in. Also, let's face it, I'm the only person we know other than Clint and Laura that has literally any experience with childcare whatsoever. She is correct.